there was something missing, but it was me all along. I was missing. I was missing. My trueness was missing. And where is that? That my trueness is just buried. It was just buried under all of these reactions, triggers from my nervous system. I realized one day, it's kind of like, I guess you could say, like, I put down the pen, where it was like, for a second, like, okay, let's stop for a minute. You already know it's in there. Trust yourself. What do you think, Stacey? What do you think? Don't worry about everything else. Like, I have notebooks on top of notebooks, and everybody and what they say, and like all these different things. I'm like, yeah, there's the answer. There's the answer. But then I realized I had to trust me, because I knew the answer. And all this information I got was great, because it brought me to where I am today. But I had to sit with me and be like, okay, I trust you. Like, I knew I was just looking for me. I was looking for me. I needed me to trust me, and I needed to just listen. My body was telling a story, sure was, and I just wasn't listening for a long, long time.
So the big question is this. We know spontaneous remissions and so-called miracle cures exist. We also know they aren't so spontaneous after all. I'm living proof of this, having cured my quote-unquote incurable illness. There's something to how this happens. So how do we, as humans with chronic symptoms, tap into this so-called miraculous healing capacity? That is the question, and this podcast will give you the answers. My name is Dr. Erin Hayford, and welcome to the Sacred Illness Podcast. Before we begin today's episode, just my standard medical disclaimer. This podcast is intended for educational and informational purposes only. The content should not be considered a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always consult with a qualified healthcare professional regarding any medical concerns.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Sacred Illness Podcast. This is Dr. Erin, and I'm just hopping on real quick to let you know that this is a part 2 of a 2-part series. Part 1 was just the previous episode. It's an interview with Stacey, who is taking us through her journey with MCAS, or mast cell activation syndrome. So if you didn't get to catch the first part of this, go back to the previous episode, give it a listen, and then come back here when you're ready. All right, let's go on to part 2.
Whenever I'm talking to folks on the podcast here, I'm always curious about how does some of us make it to where we are, to where we get some relief and get some healing, and we just keep going, right? Because it's a journey of keep going. And it sounds like, and it feels like there's this kind of energy in those of us who keep going, that we just have this kind of like insatiable curiosity, or just like this unwillingness to accept that this is what life is, because there has to be some of that to keep going, because it's self-generated. It's a self-generated journey I'm so happy about this physician's assistant that you had, because that's so amazing to have a doctor or a medical provider to have that sort of faith in their patient, and to really like encourage them and believe in them and support. It's so different when they're supporting you and they're going home and doing research based on what you're saying. I feel like that's just a very unique, not very common dynamic. So very glad that you had that.
Been if I didn't have, I've gone through what other people have gone through, because these stories are horrible.
Yeah.
That people, and that what you get in the medical field. And, I'm sure there was times where he was like, but he allowed space for me to, exist and have an opinion.
Yep.
And to this day, he still does, and like when I show up and I have like temperature regulation issues, yes. And that's something that still is kind of there. I can be reactive off of like cold weather and different things like that. So the last time I went and I was like, my feet, we talked about it, and he just laughs, and he's like, it might be just one of those things, Stacey, that we're just going to have to, and I'm like, I'm doing so well with all the other stuff. He's like, it's okay. And to have that support, I don't know where I would have been, especially after what would happen with my husband. Like he did that whole thing with me. So, and I feel so much for people who have been through that, really just going to doctors after doctors and just trying. And I've had those experiences. He wanted me to go to a cardiologist. And that cardiologist was like, just very dismissive. And I didn't even want to go, because I was like, I'm telling you, I know it's my autonomic nervous system. They're not going to find anything wrong. Like, I need to deal with that. And he's like, just do me a favor and go. Yeah. He's like, just so. But just so we can make sure that everything looks okay.
Right.
So I was like, fine. But I also had that experience. And the cardiologist at one point in time says to me, he's like, you're so anxious. And I broke out in hives in my chest.
Mm.
The whole thing was very triggering. And I had like the adrenaline dump. And I wanted to say to him, that's because you're making me feel this way. Like you're literally making me feel crazy in
Yep.
this moment. Like I remember the last time I went back to him, I said, I'm just here for you to just say the words to me that I know all these tests were fine, because I
Yep.
knew they were going to be. I said, yep, they're fine. And I said something, and he's like, I just think, and he talked about anxiety, and I was like, okay. I'm like, it's fine. I said, it's just very real to me, and I know it happens. And I just left it at that. And I told my physician assistant, he just, he's like, I get it, but it's the answer to everything. So
It
for
is.
it's just anxiety, that doesn't make sense.
No, right. It's like the IBS of the mental emotional world. Like, if we can't figure out what's wrong with your gut, it's IBS, which is like, well, what does that mean? It's an anxiety, and it's not said in this way because anxiety is technically a thing, but it's like, but what does that mean? Like, why is anxiety happening? What is causing this to, show up? Which I think is kind of like what you were saying too, just about your journey. It was sort of this, okay, this is helping, like the VU is helping, or, this is helping, or that is helping, but what is really driving the problem in the first place? It's just that deeper, like, but why? And I think that is, where modern medicine is not, they're just not going deep enough, right? Like, they're not going to the source. They're just kind of staying at that surface, like, well, you have hives and your heart rate's up, so that on the surface is anxiety. Like, it's like a iceberg, right? And they're looking at what they can see, and it's like, well, that's anxiety, but what's underneath? Like, where is it coming from?
Yeah.
And that's, if you dig deeper, you find this other stuff. So I think one of the big things that came up that hasn't yet in this podcast is spiritual bypassing, because I think that is such a real thing that we can do to ourselves, that our family members can, and it's all well-meaning, right? But it's, again, it's that, like, just keep it here kind of thing. Like, and I think it also speaks to human beings' general incapacity for discomfort, right? Like, we are really not good at it. And
yes,
whether that's with ourselves or with our loved ones. And, we don't like to see people suffer. We don't like to see people hurting. And so we try to focus on that good thing, like with your husband, like, well, just be grateful that he's alive. And it's like, of course, like you said, of course, I'm grateful he's alive. And like, there's this other really huge reality to what's going on that is, not the most positive thing in my life right now. Right. And so I think you were kind of speaking to this definition that I give to, like, the healing journey. Like, the goal of the healing journey is to become whole people, which is to say that we're making space for all of it, right? Like, the joy, the beauty, the gratitude, but also the ugly parts, the grief. I mean, and it's not even ugly, I guess that's kind of derogatory, but it's the hard stuff, right? The uncomfortable stuff, because that's always going to be part of it. And especially for those of us who've experienced trauma, nothing is going to take that away. That's always going to be something that hurts, and it's going to be a bad memory, and it's going to cause experiences, or it alters our path. And so I think it's, again, spiritual bypassing, toxic positivity, modern medicine, like all these things that keep us up here, right?
Yeah.
It's like, we need to go deeper. We need to learn how to, in somatic language, in Dr. Levine's language, it's expanding, or I guess it's polyvagal theory, all these people who do this work, it's like expanding that capacity, expanding that window of tolerance for all of the things. Because otherwise, I think your story with your husband kind of perfectly demonstrates how easy it is, so to speak, to go back to the old behavior, kind of the old way of coping with things, if that new way hasn't been well worn into our system yet. Like, it was an immediate, like, your system just went back to everything's fine. You went into survival mode, which makes sense. I mean, you really were in a place of needing to just survive for a while you were figuring out this new dynamic. So in some way, shape, or form, that's very normal. But because of the way that your nervous system was functioning in survival mode previously, like, all that came back on board too. So how long was that journey for you between, like, the aneurysm, and I am so grateful that he survived, and also that you came to the other side of it personally as well. How long of a journey was that for you, from the moment of the aneurysm to, like, getting back on track and getting your symptoms back under control?
So I would say it was So we're going on 4 years now. So I would say it took a good 2 years for me to really, like you said, I just went back to what I know, and that was survival, and it was just, that's how it goes, and this is how I'm going to do it. This is what works. This is what's
Yep.
safe.
Yep.
My body was like, nope, nope. And so I want to say it was about 2 years, and it just all these little symptoms, they just crept in, and then they were yelling, and then it was yelling, and I was like, and it took, once again, yelling of my body, like when my mast cells got activated for the first time, for me to go, oh, okay, here I am, what's going on, and this is not working, it's just not. And knowing that capacity thing, like you were talking about, and that window of tolerance. And also, I thought that my window of tolerance had to be like, I don't know, like I thought my window of tolerance was, I don't know if this makes sense, but it had to be like so big, like tolerant of all things, like, and not have any feelings. So like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I had to be tolerant of all things, and I couldn't, and I shamed myself if I went out of my window of tolerance. So you were playing a part, and you were
Yes.
doing what you had to do and pretending and stuffing things down.
Yeah.
And now, with that as actually my window of tolerance, kind of shrunk, I can spend more time in there because I allow myself to come out of that and actually feel, actually exist,
Yep.
actually, have said it, those other feelings, and, and knowing, what I'm capable of and what I'm not, and honoring my body and just listening. But it's a lot.
It is a lot. And I think you said it perfectly when you said you kind of went back to old behaviors. You said this is safe. And I think that's really important to highlight, is even though technically it's like a way of being in the world that's causing physical symptoms, and it's not you being authentic with your emotions, what is familiar is safe, and your nervous system was familiar with that, right? And so it was the default pathway. And because I think I say this on every episode, but it bears repeating, which is that the nervous system does not like the unknown. And the nervous system is interesting because it's not this like autonomous organ system, right? Like it's a responding system. So it's not really doing anything that we're not telling it to do, so to speak. It's giving back what it has received. It's programmed, right? So it's kind of this response network, essentially. I had a patient once say that it's like AI, because AI is like, you feed something into it and then it spits something back, and it just keeps kind of responding to what you're giving it. And it's like,
yeah, 100%.
It's like basically that. Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah. So it's essentially, it's just it's responding. So if there's these constant inputs of like, this is unsafe and this is unsafe and this is unsafe and this, so it's starting to respond in this way where it's saying, okay, so you're saying everything is unsafe, I'm going to constantly be in survival mode then. And I think this is how we had actually met, is I made a post on Instagram about MCAS, and I had kind of reflected on the conversation I had with someone else who has this condition or syndrome, and was essentially saying, what I've noticed is there's this feeling of like nothing is safe in the world because of what happens with trauma, like the specific trauma or traumas that have happened in people's lives who end up developing MCAS, is this feeling of like nothing is safe, I have to be on the defense for everything. And then eventually the body starts to kind of reflect that back to like, okay, yeah, so this scent is not safe, this deodorant is not safe, this food is not safe, this bug, this flower, this whatever,
everything.
Yeah. And so if we take away how terrible that is on a reality level, it's actually very wise on a physiological level, because the body's like, okay, you're telling me nothing's safe, great, I will defend you to the tooth and nail, like beyond what
I got your back.
Yeah, like you said at the beginning, it's like, it's way too much, it's like this insane overzealous response. But it's, again, this intelligent response given what it's been inputted with, essentially. So it's kind of taking it back to, again, like, what are the inputs, like what's being given to my nervous system, how is it responding, or why is it responding in this way? And I think another thing that you said too that's really great to like highlight is, you did the diet, you cleaned up your environment, which I think is important, like you said, just in general. And it really highlights how, this is how I think of it, as the nervous system is that it's a foundation, right? It's like, it's that iceberg analogy again. That's kind of the piece under the surface that we have to get to. And then those other things are important. I think they're part of this puzzle that we all put together in our healing journey of like, what are all the pieces that are going to fit for me to help my body feel better? But that nervous system is the essential layer. Like it's that foundational piece where if your nervous system continues to feel like nothing is safe, you could eat like one carrot for the rest of your life and nothing else, and it's still going to not feel, it's going to eventually start to hate that carrot.
Yes, exactly.
So
Exactly.
it sounds like you I think you said, and so correct me if I'm wrong, that like all those things helped some, but you had that
Yes.
continuous feeling of like there's something else here.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's basically it. It's, like it's that feeling too, like, I don't know about you, but even like growing up and not realizing that you're in survival mode this whole time, but I always had this feeling inside that there was something more. There was something more to me. There was something more. And it was like I was just constantly being held back and living in that place, And so then that kind of became like I think my way of life though is like, and then I get sick and there's just, you're doing these things, but there's something more, Stacey. What is that?
Yep.
What is it? There's something missing. Something's missing. What is it? Like yay for like the people that love to research and do all these things and all of that, but it can be a little daunting and it can be a little too much because also you're feeding into that. I'm not safe. I need all the information.
Yes.
So that I can feel safe.
Yes.
So what I began to learn was there was something missing, but it was me all along. I was missing. I was missing. My trueness was missing. And where is that? That my trueness is just buried. It was just buried under all of these reactions, triggers from my nervous system. I realized one day, it's kind of like, I guess you could say, like I put down the pen where it was like for a second, like, okay, let's stop for a minute. You already know it's in there. Trust yourself. What do you think, Stacey? What do you think? Don't worry about everything else. Like I have notebooks on top of notebooks and, everybody and what they say and like all these different things. I'm like, yeah, there's the answer. There's the answer. But then I realized I had to trust me because I knew the answer. And all this information I got was great because it brought me to where I am today. But I had to sit with me and be like, okay, I trust you. Like I knew I was just looking for me. I was looking for me. I needed me to trust me and I needed to just listen. My body was telling a story, sure was, and I just wasn't listening for a long, long time.
Hi everyone, Dr. Erin here. So by now you're starting to get an idea of some of what the sacred illness paradigm is all about. The sacred illness paradigm is all about this question of what is your illness inviting you to become? What is it that lies within each of us that allows some of us to acquire so-called spontaneous healing or remissions? And what is the key to unlocking that innate self-healing capacity in each and every one of us? The Sacred Illness Blueprint is something that I developed as a guide to help you walk through this process step by step to learn how to move deeper and deeper within yourself to find these layers of dysregulation, of trauma, of limiting beliefs, of things that you're holding within your system that are keeping you small, stuck, and sick. Ultimately, if we ignore the mind-body connection and are not exploring the ways in which our nervous system continues to be dysregulated or in a chronic state of activation and stress, any healing modality that we put into our body from the outside in is going to be less effective, if not effective at all. So if you are currently feeling stuck, lost, confused, or disillusioned in your healing journey, feeling like you have tried so many things, you have tried so many modalities, you have worked with so many providers, and you're just not seeing the results you want, know that this is normal, and of course you're not, because this foundational mind-body connection is often, if not always, missed in all of these modalities. And just like we can't build a house on top of sand, our healing cannot grow and blossom and be strong and successful if the foundation is not laid first. So rather than doing something different but similar to everything you have tried before and expecting different results, I encourage you to consider doing something different altogether. This is where I invite you to explore the Sacred Illness Group Coaching Program. This is a low-cost monthly membership option that I have created. It's constantly open, constantly enrolling, where you can begin to explore this completely different way of engaging in your health, in your body, in your illness, and in your healing process. What is provided inside this group coaching program is the blueprint that lays the foundation and lays the path out for you to follow to begin to explore these deeper aspects of health, to truly get at the root of what is causing your illness, and from there allowing all other modalities to blossom so that you can actually start to see the changes and the healing take place in your body that you have been expecting and wanting all along. If you're ready and want to learn more, head on over to aurorasomatic.com, and at the top of the screen, click on Group Coaching, where you can read all about it and become a member today. I can't wait to see you on the inside, and for now, let's get back to the podcast.
I was too afraid. Fear is something, and when you live with it your whole entire life, it's really hard, because I feel like I don't know what it's like to not be fearful. You start maybe trying to come out of that, and then something happens again, like my husband and that thing, and it triggers me right back into that, because you live in this place, and then it was like, he's going to die every day, like waking up, making sure his stomach's, or his chest is rising, and like that. Well, of course, that's going to bring me right back to like what we said before, and I'm back in that survival mode. I have been afraid, I'm pretty sure, since the day that I graced this earth. And I always thought that, like, oh, woe is you, Stacey, like kind of thing, if I ever had those feelings. But then I realized that, I don't know, in those feelings, like just that truth, it's okay, because I'm also like, I don't sit and stay there. If that makes sense. In those feelings of like, I want to acknowledge them. And then when I give them space to exist, they kind of just,
Isn't that amazing? Yeah.
So
it's
amazing.
Like all they need is to be, it's like a little kid, it's just all they need is to be like, oh, you're having a bad, that really hurt you. And then I see that in my 3-year-old, like the second I'm like, that was really hard, wasn't it? And he's like, yep. And then he's done. That's it. Right. It's just, that's all it needs is that acknowledgement. And
you just need that acknowledgement. Yeah. To be like, okay. Yeah. And it was very real. That's what I've taught myself too, and learned, like this was real.
Yeah.
Saying things out loud is sometimes what you need, and that was so hard for me, like saying it out loud, and the anxiety it would bring, and like, oh, and then you just bringing it to life, but not because you're going to sit in it and like swim in all that muck and all that bad stuff. You're bringing it to life so that it can be put to bed in a way.
Essentially. Yeah, exactly. To release it. And
you have to.
You do. Yeah. And something you had said earlier too is, so I feel like so many people were probably like, yes, that is exactly how I feel, because I've heard it so many times from other people, is that fear of, if I actually look at it, if I actually allow it, like, then it's real. And then what, and like, that's a terrifying feeling. And I think it's because we, I'm sure there's a million reasons why, but one of the things I have seen is there's this feeling of like, that feels so terrible, and I don't know how to deal with terrible because I was never taught it, or it was modeled very poorly for me. And so there's this feeling of like, if I allow terrible to come out, I'm going to be stuck there for the rest of my life, and I don't want that. And so we choose what you were saying before, which is numbness. Like I have this major tolerance for everything, but I'm numb to it. I don't feel anything. And like, that's comfortable to us because it's like, well, I'm not feeling anything, so it's fine. But if we kind of, like you said, kind of bring it in and narrow that down, and we really like get real and actually allow ourselves to feel, then we're like, oh, actually, I can't really tolerate very much at all, because I never learned how to actually sit with that feeling. And like, we have to what we understand now with emotions is, obviously there's like a peak, and then it gets big, and then it goes away if we allow ourselves to be with it. And it doesn't mean it's not going to come back, but like, there's waves to things. And so what we, and you can see that in kids, in little kids with tantrums, there's obviously like a rise, and then eventually it falls, but only if you allow yourself to be with it, right? Like if you allow yourself to feel it and to be with it, eventually, once it's like expressed and, acknowledged, it will fall. But what so many of us experienced as kids was we'd have the feeling, and then it would get stuck there in that peak or like in that buildup, because no one was there to hold space for it, or we got punished for it, or we got shamed for it, or something happened where it just wasn't safe for it to come out. And so we stopped it right there. And so our experience is like, this is terrible. It feels terrible. The experience of it is terrible in all ways. So I'm just not going to feel it. And I'm definitely not going to let it out. And then that creates that story of like,
or it becomes that unknown of like, so I have no idea what it would actually look like to go into that, because I've never gone past, this far of an experience of that emotion.
How scary is that?
Yeah, exactly.
So scary.
So
And it's the
scary.
unknown.
Yeah.
That's exactly what you said. It's the unknown.
Yeah.
Like, I don't like the unknown. I don't like to not know things. But
Yeah.
in a weird way, I spent so much time not knowing things because I did that stop,
Yeah.
because or I wasn't allowed to, or I wasn't given the space to,
Yep.
and all of that. But it's the unknown, and what does that look like? And then
Right.
all of a sudden, the first time you step into that and you say something out loud. And I just remember, and I remember I was just looking up above on the wall as I was saying it, and I stopped, and I was like, this is so uncomfortable. It was so heavy to bring something out like that. And then when it was all said and done and I walked away from it, that moment, I felt lighter.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, so heavy, so uncomfortable, but then all of a sudden there was just this like,
Yeah.
I was like, wow, I want to do that again.
Yeah. It feels
like,
so good.
yes, I want to do that again, actually. And then my nervous system is like, oh, wait, that wasn't so bad.
Yep.
So then you're showing your nervous system, oh, okay, wait, maybe I don't have to put up the alarms, because it's alarming the whole time you're pushing that out of you and saying, your truth. And it's like, no, no, back it up, Stace. We don't do this, like, no,
What are you
and
doing?
like, shh, shh, shh. And then you push through, and then your nervous system is like, oh, wait a second. And then it makes it a little bit easier.
Exactly.
And the next time you go in, it's a little bit easier.
Yep.
And then another time it may be really bad if it's a really big thing, but and I think that's where too, like, because I'm not very good with all my memories. Like and from being in fight or flight, and I learned, disassociating and like stopping things and then just like coming out of my body. So I didn't have to be in that moment and experience it. So that's where EMDR therapy came in, and was helpful. But not knowing some stuff, but then still releasing it is, like they explain, I didn't need to remember all things to be able to release them, because I thought, well, I'm never going to I don't remember anything. I remember things, but not as much as other people do. And sometimes the things I remember only bad things, but she was like, you'll be able to do, don't have to. She's shining light on things that it's still there. She's like, it's back there. And so, and I would just all of a sudden feel just lighter.
Yes.
I'm like, okay, here it is, like, here it is. What a gift you can give yourself, right?
Truly.
Is to, just love yourself, know that you're worth it, and that you can heal, and to show yourself you matter, you're worthy. These things, like, they were so uncomfortable to me, and the more and more that I believe it, the more and more my health, I just thrive, and like I said, there's still moments, you can still have moments, but I no longer shame myself. It's not like, oh, what'd you do now, Stacey? It's not that. It's just, okay, because when you deal with such a, chronic illness or different things like that, or something that is so not studied, like mast cell or dysautonomia is such a huge thing now.
Yeah.
But even that, you just feel alone and crazy. But if you just, I don't know, you just start loving yourself, and you can heal, you can function in life again, and you can be a part of life. And chronic illness doesn't have to be the end all. And it doesn't have to be chronic. It doesn't have to be, like, that's even the wrong word. Like, it doesn't have to be chronic. It doesn't have to be, all these tests that they give, and they're like, oh, your blood work's normal, it's fine. There's nothing wrong, or even sending to a cardiologist. Well, your heart's great. Well, how about we just talk about the mental health part of it? Or let's just touch on what's happened to you in your life. Let's teach people more about their bodies, and what we put in it or what we expose it to. Yes, those are all important things. But your nervous system is like the end all. Once I learned as much as I did, I was like, it's everything. It's everything.
It is.
Right?
Yeah.
It was like mind blowing to me. I'm like, every function and everything I'm doing it comes from that point.
Totally.
The system, it has to be working properly. And if you have trauma, it's not going to work the way that it needs to, so that you can thrive. You have to look at that.
You have to. And I think you said it perfectly earlier too, which is that we could say now everyone has trauma of some capacity, because
Mhm.
I think we all, I mean, so let's, I guess, put it into context. Like, trauma is when something is so distressing that we don't know how to deal with it. Essentially, we don't have the capacity. Our nervous system doesn't have that expanded window of tolerance. Like, it's an event that goes outside of what we can tolerate, essentially. So that can be a car accident. It could be, and obviously I'm not going to list off trauma because I don't want to trigger anyone, right? But it can be many things.
Yes.
And so, I think a lot of people have heard of, there's like capital T trauma, which is like the big things we can think of. We used to just think it was military related, but now we know there's lots of capital T traumas that can happen. And then there's little T traumas, which are, more day-to-day kind of distressing things that can happen, but they're still distressing. It takes us out of our capacity to deal with it. And I think because, as we had said earlier, as humans and culturally, we're so terrible at dealing with discomfort, our go-to mechanism is just to shove it away or to ignore it, or I'm fine, right? Like your mantra, I'm fine, everything's fine.
Right.
Because there's something about being strong or putting on a brave face. Like we so lift that up in this culture. I think we're moving away from it, but up until very recently, we've really put a prime sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Like we really like put that on a pedestal, right? Like, oh, look how brave they are. Look at how strong they are. Look at how they didn't cry when this terrible thing happened. Like, what? That is not a good, like, that is not a sign of strength,
No.
And so I think we're moving again toward like actually allowing ourselves to be human about things. But I think that's why it's, fair to say that we all have some form of trauma, because we all have been brought up in this culture of like suppression or just not knowing how to deal with it, or and there's this, I read this research a while ago, and I might be botching the details of it, but the message will come across, which is during 9/11, they did a study on children specifically who were around the towers and who were in the city during the bombing. And they found that children so essentially when stress happens, our nervous system gets activated, and either it wants to fight the threat or run away from it. So that's fight or flight. That's kind of our initial defense mechanism, is either fight it and destroy it or get away from it.
Yep.
If we can't do that, if we can't fight it or run away from it, then we go into freeze, which is like shut down, which is basically our body, like, being merciful so that we're kind of like not present when we die, which is essentially what our freeze response thinks is going to happen. It's like, oh, this is so bad, we're probably going to die. Let's just not be here because we don't need to see this happening. And so that's what happens if we can't run away or fight. And so during 9/11, they did these studies on children, and they found that the children who ran away, like, their family like grabbed their hands and they ran away, like they could get away from the crashing happening of the buildings. They were scared. There was obviously still some after effects, but they didn't get trauma. They did not have PTSD from that event. Like, they didn't keep reliving it. They didn't have flashbacks, they didn't have any sort of like residual effects that we understand to be PTSD, because they got to run away from it. They processed it, right? So it's kind of that thing we were talking about, where they went into that activation, and then they came out on the other side.
Yes.
Whereas kids who sheltered in place and kind of went into a freeze, like, we can't run, whether they were too close or whatever was happening, like they just had to shelter, they survived, but they couldn't run. They developed PTSD because they were not able to get away from it. And so I think that's the thing that culturally I'm wanting us to understand more, is when we get activated, that's normal. We're always going to be activated. We're always going to be stressed, right? And
Yes.
so again, kind of using your example, when you were doing your work and then your husband had his aneurysm and your system kind of went back, it's about understanding that we're always going to have those moments of stress and distress. And, that event was like too soon in your healing journey where you didn't have that. Like, I mean, I don't know if anyone has the capacity to deal with that without going offline. I mean, that's just one of those big T traumas, right? That's going to always be outside of our window of tolerance, because it's not like you're dealing with that all the time. But the fact of the matter that we have to kind of teach our nervous system is that healing is not about like never bumping up against discomfort ever again. It's not about never feeling stress ever again. It's about actually learning how to tolerate it, right? It's just learning how to, like, how do I go into fight or flight and deal with this thing and feel the emotions of it and then come back out of it.
Hey, Sacred Illness listeners, Dr. Erin here. I'm quickly interrupting today's episode to put out the invitation to you or anyone you know who has a chronic illness or chronic symptoms that would like to come onto the podcast and share your story. Our goal is to invite folks onto the show who have worked with mind-body medicine modalities and noticed an improvement or even a complete resolution of symptoms using this potent medicine. If this describes you, check the link in the show notes below that will take you to a quick application to fill out that will give us some information about who you are, what your story is, and we'll take it from there. And again, if you know anyone who might also fit this description or like to come onto our show, please feel free to share the link with them as well. All right, let's get back to the episode.
I'm curious for you nowadays, like obviously you still have stress in your life. Like when you bump up against stressors, what is that experience like for you? I think you spoke to that a little bit earlier, but
Yeah. I feel like now a lot of things that I remind myself is I give myself grace. And that's one of the most important things. So when I'm bumping up against stressors and I'm feeling that I'm being triggered, I'm acknowledging that.
Yeah.
I'm acknowledging it in the moment. If it's just me having a conversation with myself, in a sense, I'm really trying not to run. I'm a runner. That's who I was. And now I realize that, disassociation was, the game. That's how I did it. That's how I stayed safe.
Yep.
Being in fight or flight mode. Yes. Like everything is not safe. I'm fearful, but I would, just cut it off and not be in that moment and allow it.
Yep.
I'm learning to not stay quiet and stay small, but not like I'm running around like,
right.
Not like that, but I'm bringing it to life and being like, okay, I am feeling this. When I hit that, I am feeling this and I'm allowing that space. And then I'm allowing myself to be like, okay, is that true? Is that real? Is this really what's happening? And then once you go through that process, you can kind of feel it in your body, right? When you're like, okay, and then your body will just kind of, and again, that doesn't mean there's some times where my body isn't getting the message right away. I've had some recent stuff happen lately. It was very triggering and I was having a hard time coming out of it, but I was aware of it. So we are all just doing the best that we can with what we have.
Absolutely.
And if I'm going to have those moments where I'm really proud of myself when I have a moment and I use my words, in a way that's, not as weapons or anything like that, just giving myself space and then allowing, or when I'm having moments where I'm like, ooh, you're struggling with this, Stacey. Maybe you just need more time. Maybe you need some rest. Maybe you just need to, pull back a little bit. This is a tough one instead of it being the end of the world and not allowing myself to find my way back.
You're characterizing it so well of what this looks like and how it feels, right? It's really, I think what we're doing in this work is well, you said it, we're coming back into our body, right? And when we come back into our body and we actually live in our body, then we can actually feel what our body is feeling kind of in the moment, versus that numbness and just that kind of reactivity that we can have. Otherwise, we're just reacting to the world versus, I don't know what the other word would be, but instead of being reactionary, we're more embodied and we can be more precise. And so there's that quote that I always quote, which is essentially between impulse and response, there's a pause, and that's what we're working to get. So that's what you're describing, right? Is you're getting this feeling in your body and you're saying, okay, do I need to express this or do something with it, like with the person in the room or whatever, or do I hold it and sit with it and process it? And I think that's the wisdom that comes with this work, is working with our body and recognizing that not everything needs to come out, right? Which is kind of the dysregulated way of being with emotions. Either come out in this big way or just completely don't feel it at all. Like those extreme ends are dysregulation. The middle ground is everything in between, right?
Oh, yeah. You say that, and that's like, I say it all the time. That is one of the things that I say all the time is about, and I just picture it as like this pendulum and everything's, just it's swinging, and extremism is such a huge thing. And obviously in so many different aspects of life, but we're either way over here, somebody's way over here, but if you can the middle ground is where the answer is. That is where it lies. Yes, there's like one really big emotion and then the other, and just meet yourself in the middle. Give yourself grace and meet yourself in the middle, because that's where you're going to find clarity. That's where you're going to be able to make good decisions in your life. You can't make a good decision if you're way over here. You just can't. It's not possible. If it's just not. But finding that middle ground and finding that place where you can just go, Okay. And making, living your life from there when you can,
Mhm.
because obviously it's not always possible, but when you can, it's like the key. It really is. It's
Yeah.
the key. And just getting back in your body,
Yes.
getting back in your body, and just teaching your body and your nervous system that, not everything is dangerous. It's been the hardest thing that I've ever experienced. And I am still to this day, pushing through that and, making sure that I'm taking care of that and taking the steps I need to continue on my healing journey. Sometimes we're going to take 20 steps back, but that's okay too. And as much as it doesn't feel safe, like we were talking about that familiar, and that
Yeah.
saying they say like your nervous system would rather like that familiar hell over an unfamiliar heaven. The alarms go up because even though it might be the answer, but it's different and
Totally.
it's not familiar. Just find that space just to push past that. Get curious. Just step into that place. And I don't take a day, like for granted on a good day. And everybody's always like, Stacey, when are you gonna, like try to like do more? Because I am very structured in a lot of things I do. And they're like, when are you going to, like maybe you should try this or do this? And I'm like, I'm really comfortable where I am right now. And that's okay. I'm good. And I feel like it's helping me to continue to feel safe that I can move on my healing journey.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I'm going to add something, or do something crazy, with my
Yeah.
diet. But I also don't feel ready, and I allow myself that space.
Right.
I'm honest when people say things to me and I'm like, I don't think that I'm ready. I can feel my body get anxiety, like with nervousness about something. And I'm like, I'm just not ready yet.
Yep.
But it doesn't mean I won't be, but I give myself grace. I'm gentle and I do the work. And then sometimes, some days I don't. That's okay too.
Totally.
Right?
It's about being human, right? It's meeting yourself
Yes.
where you're at every step.
Yes.
And there's no algorithm to this. Yeah, it's
Yes.
your experience. And I think that's exactly it, is when we talk about expanding that window of tolerance, it's a safety window, right? We're expanding what feels safe to us. And it doesn't feel safe when you like rip a Band-Aid off and force it to happen, right? Like there's some pushing, right? Like there's obviously it's that, that cheesy saying of like growth happens just outside the comfort zone, but it's literally just outside. It's like right there. You don't have to go like 20 miles away. Like it's just outside. So it's treated, and that's the word that Peter Levine uses in somatic work, is titration. It's these little titrated doses, right? That you're just going a little bit further and a little bit further, and it's essentially what you said earlier of like, every time you experience a new emotion or allow yourself to feel something or allow yourself to bring something into the light to heal it, you're showing your nervous system, we can do this. Like, this is tolerable. We can look at this, we can feel this thing, we can think these thoughts, we can have this experience. And look, I'm still here. I'm still alive. Because, as silly as that might sound, the nervous system is all about survival. And it literally feels like these distressing things will kill it, will kill you, will end your life. So it's really it's all about survival. So that's why it's like, well, yes, technically this thing is not good for us, but we know that you're going to live through it. So we're going to keep doing it. Right. So it's going to keep doing the things that it knows you'll stay alive through, until you show it like, well, okay, but that's actually not the most best thing we could do. Let's try this other thing. And slowly we'll grow into that. And then eventually your nervous system is like, oh yeah, this is better. You're right. Sorry. Like, let's do that instead. So it's expanding that safety, that experience of safety. And I think it is truly at the core of all of this, as you said, it's coming back to yourself. It's finding you. It's figuring out who you are. And I remember, I don't know how old I was, but I used to keep a journal my whole life. And I remember probably in middle school, there's this drawing I have in my journal where I'm writing about this like core of emptiness I feel in my body. And I'm just saying, like, I feel like I just don't exist. Like, there's nothing in here. It's like, I feel like my existence is, and it's like so articulate for a middle schooler, but it's that feeling. I just had that feeling of like, I'm not here. Like, where am I? Who am I? There's nothing inside. It's and that's survival based, right? It's all out here. It's just constantly scanning the environment. Who do I need to be? How do I need to show up? What do I need to do today? So there's no time for you to become yourself. We're always there. Like, our self is always here, but it's just underdeveloped essentially, right? Because we didn't get to have that experience. So
100%.
So it's that journey, but back to it. Yeah. And so we had talked at the beginning before we started recording about you know, our goal for this podcast is to essentially give people hope, to show people that, you know, there's no reality in which someone can't heal. No body is different from any other body, right? It's just finding these steps and putting together your own individual journey. You had mentioned a couple of resources in terms of therapies you did, one of which is EMDR, which I think a lot of people are familiar with. You also mentioned tapping, which is emotional freedom technique, EFT. I would highly recommend. I do that too with my counselor that I work with, and it's phenomenal. So those are two things people can check out in Google and find practitioners.
100%.
And then you have some resources that you have created or are creating yourself. Do you want to share about those as well?
Yes. So I am creating some resources, and I've done some ebooks, which I'm getting ready to put out. And I have one just on nervous system regulation. And I have another one on the vagus nerve, just for simple things, because some people want to know that. But also I'm in the middle of writing for mast cells. So it's kind of, I have a little theme to it, but it's Dear Mast Cells, you know, because my book that I wrote that I'm not ready to put out in the world, but will be, it's Dear John, because I wrote to John the whole time he was in the hospital. But it's a journey of, you know, grief, but also nervous system, and how, you know, what I went through and what I needed to come out of that. So it all revolves around, you know, nervous system regulation, including the mast cell one. I offer a guide, which will be coming out, I think, in about a month, of just quick, really great techniques for nervous system regulation. So to understand your nervous system, all the parts of it, and things that you can do, including with breath work and just things that I tried. And some of them didn't work for me. They just weren't for me. But I figure one size doesn't, you know, it's like that. What doesn't work for me might work for somebody, but I wish somebody just handed me a list of some stuff, you know, and just a little bit of guides out there, you know, these guides that I've just been creating, and I'm going to have them up. I started my website and I started a blog. So you'll be able to read my first 3 blogs here by the end of the week. And we can put my website on your thing if that's what you would like. Yes. And they can go and they could read my blogs, and then I will have everything else up and running and available. There's a free ebook on nervous system regulation that you can download from there. And then there's another one that's coming up on the vagus nerve. That's just a free ebook. And then my other stuff is just a little bit bigger books of my life and my story, the story of me, the story of my story with mast cells and how they went wild on me. And then my story of grief. And then in the end, I think that's all I want to do. Is I just want my experience to help somebody else, because if I only had that kind of support, you know, I think, and I just want to be able to, sometimes somebody's experience can really help somebody else. And that's all I want to do.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, and I know, I just know from the folks who follow my work and who listen to this podcast, you know, just by doing this, you're helping, and with those resources. And I said this to you when we, you know, before we started today, just that it's so much more impactful coming from someone who has walked the journey, right? In your specific journey, because mine is different with autoimmune disease and Crohn's and all that sort of thing. But it's when it's your symptoms, your diagnosis, you know, and it's just so, it just hits different, right? And I think it's so relatable, so much of what you had shared. And it's always just so fascinating to me too, the themes, you know, all of our stories are different, and yet there's these themes that carry through. And I think that's the current I want people to start to get into, is like, this is my story too. There's details that are different, but there's this current that it is running through all of us. So, you know, people are, I once was told, like, we only have to be a little bit further down the stream than the people who are, you know, trying to do what we're doing. And so, you know, we're just saying, this is the next step for you, or this is where we were where you are now, and this is how we got to the next point, or this is how we got to where we are. And so they can like catch that current and keep going and keep going and keep going. And like you said, this is more, we're trying to consolidate and give this information to people, because we didn't have it. We had to piecemeal it and put it together. And, you know, my journey was 10 years. I think you said yours was 7 from start to now. And so it's like, if we can just save people, either save them time or just give them hope, you know, like to give them a little bit more of a structured path. What a gift that is, truly. So,
and I love that word, just hope, you know, like if we can just give hope, and as soon as you can feel some hopeful, it changes things. Like
It does.
there's a chance that what does that mean? Yeah, I could do this, and that ignites something.
Yep.
And sometimes we can feel really hopeless, and I honor that too. But
Yep.
the second that you start feeling hopeful,
Yes.
shifts.
Yeah. I want people to catch that current, catch the hope current,
Yes,
and then
exactly.
know how to ride the waves when it's not totally available.
Exactly.
But yeah.
Exactly. But anyways, this has
Thank
been
you.
such an honor. I have, as soon as I found you, I have just enjoyed everything about you, your mind, what you share. It's beautiful. And I'm really thankful that we've got to,
Thank you.
share space.
Likewise, thank you. I'm
much
so
for this.
honored. Your spirit is like, I wish I could give you a hug, but it's
Oh,
so
thank
lovely to
you.
connect with you and to hear your
Thank you.
story. And yeah, and I will put all of the links in the show notes below. So if you're listening, today's July 8th, 2024. So if you're listening in the future, you might already see the links below. If you're listening in the near future, we'll be adding links later for Stacey's ebooks
Yes.
and all the things as they come out. So just tune back in if you're interested, or check out her website, because I'm sure they'll be linked on your website
Yes.
as well. Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Right.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you so
Thank
much,
you
Stacey.
so much.
We'll
Thank
see you all
you.
next time.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of the Sacred Illness Podcast. If you find this information shared here inspirational and educational, please share it with those you think would benefit from this work. To take this work deeper yourself, check out our website, www.aurorasomatic.com, where you can explore our coaching, community, and course options. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel, where new content is coming out all the time, intended to inspire, awaken, and help you deepen your relationship with yourself, your life, and your world. We'll see you next time.